Hi there, I'm Dr. Amelia Fay, the curator of the Hudson's Bay Company Museum collection here at the Manitoba Museum. And today I'm in the Hudson's Bay Company Gallery and standing next to a pretty incredible artifact that's on temporary display here at the museum. This is the HBC Royal Charter. It's 350 years old and it's in really great condition. So I wanted to talk a little bit about its history, what it's made of, why we have it, and what we're doing to address some of the problematic history that centers around this document. So the Royal Charter was granted by King Charles II in 1670. And this charter was granted to what we now call the Hudson's Bay Company, and it encompasses roughly 40% of what we now call Canada. The entire Hudson Bay drainage area, a huge swath of land, is granted in this simple parchment document. The document itself is written on parchment, which is actually animal skin. And so it's a lot thicker than paper. It's nice and durable. The animal was likely either deer or calf. And you can even on one of the pages see the neck rings of this animal. So there are 5 pages, one of which is beautifully decorated that you can see on display, and the others that are rolled up near the bottom. Of course, people often say King Charles II signed the Royal Charter, but he didn't sign it, he issued his royal seal. And so at the very bottom of the case, you can see a large wax seal that's kind of hanging or suspended from the bottom of the rolled parchment. And so this wax seal was basically his signature, him signing over this Royal Charter to this company. And the wax seal might be actually the most fragile part of this entire piece. The document itself outlines the corporate structure of the company. It outlines, there will be a governor. This is the structure of the company. We are going to do X, Y, Z. But for me, the most interesting part of it is this land grant and what that meant. And so one of the biggest questions that we can pose is how can a king from another country possibly grant land that wasn't his? Land that was already occupied by thousands of years by Indigenous peoples here in what we now call Canada. And so it's framed around these ideas of a time period when it was called the Age of Discovery. And we know, of course, that they weren't discovering things. These lands were already occupied by Indigenous peoples. The resources were already used. But King Charles II and other monarchs from other colonial nations sought out these new areas, new territories, to claim them for their countries. And so this document is a reflection of that time period, and a reflection of those attitudes at the time period. And the ideas that sort of framed that were centered around 2 key points. The Doctrine of Discovery, so again, that idea of discovering new lands, particularly because they thought if land wasn't occupied by Christians, it was free for the taking. Also the idea of terra nullius, so the idea that when they arrived over here in what we now call Canada, they're not seeing the same sort of structures and organization that they would see in their European countries, so they just assumed the land was vacant, and we know that's not true. So it's an interesting document from that angle in that it played a big role for Europeans, but it really on the ground here did not play a big role until much later. And we see that kind of emerge when Hudson's Bay Company decides to sell Rupert's Land to what would soon become Canada. And that again document took place without Indigenous consultation at all. But at that point, people started to recognize what these documents could mean to them here on the land. So for us at the Manitoba Museum, we really wanted to highlight that nature of this document. And people might think, oh, a 350-year-old document, what does that have to do with us today? Well, it's hugely important because this really set the tone for what would eventually become Canada and for the relationships between Indigenous peoples and European settlers. It really frames a lot of discussions we have today about land claims and land rights. And so it's not just a fragment of the past, it's definitely a part of the present. And so you can think about what that means. You can think about how land grants like this took place, not just here in Canada, but other parts of the world, and how that affected local Indigenous populations then and today.